All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. The expectations for this year were not that high or not as high as they were heading into last season for the New York Mets. And you're starting to get that feeling right now that this could be a long summer in Queens. Now, after beginning this season with a record of 18-18, the Mets have dropped 10 out of their last 13, which includes being swept this week at the hands of the Cleveland Guardians. Uh, you know, I expected the Mets to be up and down this season, and I'm going to touch on that in a minute. But you think back to a couple of weeks ago where, things were going to be very interesting for the Mets. They had a 7 game stretch where they faced the top 2 teams in the National League East, the Atlanta Braves and the Philadelphia Phillies. And of course, as expected, it did not go that well for the Mets as they only went 2-5 over that stretch. They won 1 game against the Braves and then 1 game against the Phillies. But then, you say, okay, they'll probably get back on track against the lowly Miami Marlins. That didn't happen as New York dropped 2 out of 3 in Miami. And then, of course, they just followed that up by getting swept. And of course, the sweep was concluded today, courtesy of Cleveland. So, there's a lot of questions about this team that you can ask, and one question for me is where's the offense? You look at the Mets, they've been held to 3 runs or less over the last 13 games 7 times, including a couple of shutouts. And you look at the batting averages of some of their key players. Francisco Lindor is batting 203, Jeff McNeil 240, Brandon Nimmo 220, Brett Beatty 228, Pete Alonso 236. This is their batting averages, okay? It's not their weight, all right? And at the end of the day, if you're not hitting, it ain't going to work. You also look at the fact that the Mets, they really don't have starting pitching that can consistently go deep into games. You're talking about right now, no Met starting pitcher is currently in the top 40 in the National League in regards to innings pitched this season. And the results are beginning to show because when you don't have starters that can consistently go deep into ball games, it's going to tax your bullpen. And we're not even at Memorial Day right now, and this bullpen for New York is starting to get taxed. Speaking of bullpens, Edwin Diaz, the All-Star closer for the Mets, has been far from lights out. I know that he's returning from the leg injury that he suffered last year in the World Baseball Classic, but this month alone has not been good for Diaz. On the season, he has an ERA of 5.50. I know it's very easy for that number to go up for a relief pitcher. 3 blown saves this month, a 9.82 ERA for this month. You think about it, just this past Saturday, and the Mets lost to the Marlins. He gave up 4 runs in a third of an inning. He had the blown save about 10 days ago against the Phillies. And it's one of those things, it's adding up. And for me, relief pitchers and closers, especially closers, all right, they are like field goal kickers in football. When they're on, they're on. And when they're not, they're not. And unfortunately for Edwin Diaz and the Mets right now, he's not. Some people are talking about velocity. Some people are talking about tipping pitches. Nonetheless, it's one of those where when he was on top of his game, his fastball was as electric can be. And right now, that is not the case. You have a lot of hitters rather sitting on it. The velocity's not there, and right now, it's a recipe for disaster for both Edwin Diaz and the New York Mets. First year manager Carlos Mendoza, he's trying to get the most out of this team, as is the president of baseball operations, David Stearns. I'll tell you like this. Steve Cohen, the Mets team owner, is not getting the bang for his buck. Mets fans will poke out their chest and say, you know what, Steve Cohen is willing to spend money, which he is, okay? And I know it did not work out for the Mets last year. They moved on from some veteran guys, got some prospects back, but they're still spending money on this team this year. But you look at the guys that Cohen has, opened the vault for. Francisco Lindor, he's not producing. Jeff McNeil has really not produced since he got that contract extension. Brandon Nimmo, his productivity is going down as well. There's going to be questions swirling around Pete Alonso whether or not he gets a new contract in the offseason when he's set to enter free agency. A lot of questions about this team, but nonetheless, the guys that Steve Cohen has spent money on, they have not delivered. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So you look at it like this. I expected this Mets team to hover around 500 this year, and I still expect them to hover around 500. They're going to be an up and down team throughout. Their saving grace, of course, is a fact that there is an additional wild card now in both leagues. So, of course, that makes teams think twice as far as being buyers or being sellers, as opposed to being buyers. And you look at it right now, as bad as things are and have been for the Mets in the past couple of weeks, they're only 3 games out of the final wild card. And if you're the Mets, you could say, you know what? If we could just turn this around and get a good week and a half going, guess what? We are right back in the thick of things, and you still have more than 100 games to go on this season, 113 to be exact. So there's plenty of baseball left in front of you. So the Mets are clearly off tomorrow before they open up a 10-game homestand against the National League West. 3 this weekend with the San Francisco Giants, followed by 3 more against the first place Dodgers, and then 4 against the defending National League champs in the Arizona Diamondbacks. The Mets need to show something, okay? Because for what it's worth, and I can sit up here and say, well, they're only a couple of games out of the last wild card in the National League, which is currently true. But if we get a scenario by the middle of June or the end of June, and we're talking about the Mets 10, 12, 13 games under 500, I guarantee you there's going to be another fire sale in Flushing in regards to this team, just like we saw last year. Now, Steve Cohen wants to see results. I totally get it. He's the billionaire owner, fan turned, owner that wants to help this team get a championship the fan base has wanted to see now for nearly 40 years. But, it's one of those where the Mets, the way they're playing right now and the pieces that they have in place, they're far from it. It's one of those where, yes, the Mets still have a high payroll, and a lot of that, has to do with last season. But nonetheless, this team this year was really put together with spit and glue, especially the rotation. I think they've gotten the most out of the starting rotation that they can possibly get, in my opinion. Some might agree with that, some might not. It's all good. But nonetheless, it's what they could do. And right now, we're just seeing a baseball team that really is not good. They've been let down this year, just like they were last year, by some of their, high price guys on this team. And of course, unfortunately, part of that led to Buck Showalter losing his job. I'm sure there was more to it. And nonetheless, this team right now, they're not good. And then they're also underachieving, which is not a good recipe for success. So, like I said, there's still plenty of baseball left. The Mets can turn this around. The Mets can, you know, make a run at a playoff spot or a wild card spot theoretically because they're not catching either the Phillies or the Braves for this division. Okay, it's a 2-team race in the NL East. But nonetheless, they've got to try to get it together sooner rather than later. It's got to click for some of these guys, especially at the plate, where they got to pick their team up. The talent is there in this lineup for them to be better than what they have been. Of course, Edwin Diaz blowing some games hasn't helped things because that's taken away from some of the momentum. And of course, like I said before, starting pitchers being unable to consistently go deep into games ain't helping either. But nonetheless, at 21 and 28, they are reeling. This next homestand is going to be very important for the Mets. They've got 10 games at home. If you're talking about a situation where they're going 3-7 over the next 10 games on this homestand, I think you could see some changes being done. And maybe even before we even get to the 4th of July, this team is waving a white flag. But nonetheless, things have gotten bad for the Mets. Can they find a way to get out of their rut? Only time will tell. But, folks, that is going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank all of you for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. I want to take this time out to thank all of you fine folks out there for tuning in. And if you haven't already, please feel free to subscribe to this channel. Now, if you're on the X, formerly known as Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it will be my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365 that you can check it out. Drop a line and be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. So, once again, fine folks, my name is William Martin, and I am signing off. And I'm saying take care and have yourselves a wonderful day.